Hi, welcome to Popcorn Clicker Lesson 6. Last time we almost finished making the numbers beautiful. We're going to continue that today. Let's recap what we did. Every time we get a number in, if it's less than 10,000, we just take the floor of the number and use a gatekeeper to stop this script. Otherwise, we keep dividing the number by 1,000 until it's less than 1,000. Once that happens, we take the floor of that, we add a dot, and we add the two next numbers after the dot. If that number does not exist, we add a 0. Then we add postfix, and right now we always add a space and a k. And that has this interesting thing that if I set popcorn to 10 and I run the game, it will show 10k because we always add a space and a k. Let's have a short look at what's actually going on. Let's say this is how many popcorn we have. I'm going to divide it by 1,000. So I'm moving down here and I say, is it less than 1,000 now? No, it's not. So let's do it again. Divide by 1,000 again. Is it less than 1,000 now? No, it's not. So let's do it again. Is it less than 1,000 now? Yes, it is. So now we stop. So now the number is, let's put an arrow here and add a number here, and it's going to be 2, 3, 5. Then we add a dot. Let's make this bigger as well. Make it a different color. 2, 3, 5 and a dot. Then I want to take the 8 and the 7 from here and move down. Now I want to add a space because I want to. Now we have to figure out what letter should I add here. Well, if we just knew the number of times we divided by 1,000, then we could count. So let's add a line here that says I did it here, I did it here, and I did it here. And this is 1, 2, 3 times. So I will add a space, and then we look at what is 3 times. 0 times is nothing. If I did not divide by 1,000, then we don't need to add something. If I did it 1 time, I want to add a k. If I did it 2 times, I want to add a m. 3 times, I want to add a b. 4 times, I want to add a t. And 5 times I want to add a Q. This is what we agreed in class. So we need to count the number of times we divided by 1,000 so that afterwards we can say, let's actually add a 0 up here, 0, and let's say if it was 0, I put nothing here. If there were no times I did this, don't do anything. Let's go back to scratch. Let's go to our pretty numbers. I want to add a variable. I'm going to call it a multiplier. It's going to be for this sprite only. The job of multiplier is to keep track of how many times did we divide by 1,000. Now I need to remember to set multiplier to 0 every time I start working on a new number. So here, before I reduce the number, I will set multiplier to 0. Let's look at the first case first. If the number is less than 10,000, we set number out to the floor and we stop the script, and we can go to add postfix. In my add postfix, I'm going to say if I need an equals. If multiplier equals 0, and it will if I'm in this case where the number is less than 10,000, then I don't want to do anything. So I'm just going to stop this script as a gatekeeper. I'm going to say, yep, that's fine. Don't do anything. Now if I start to divide by 1,000, we need to count up the number of times I did that. So inside my loop here, where I divide by 1,000, I'm also going to change my multiplier by 1. So every time, just like I showed here, every time I divide by 1000, I just add 1 to the multiplier. The rest of the script is exactly the same as before. Now I go back here and I say, if, and let's duplicate this, multiplier is 1, then I want to add a space and a k. Let's duplicate this entire if block here. If it is 2, I want to add a space and an m. And if it is 3, I want to add a space and a b. Before we add the last two, I want to notice something here. In all of these 3 if blocks, and in any if blocks after this, we're going to add a space first. So anytime the multiplier is more than 0, the first thing we always do is add a space. So we could take that and move it up before I figure out what letter to add. I will always add a space, so I don't need that in my if block. This will work. I like to make these gatekeepers as well. We strictly speaking don't need it, because if multiplier is 1, it can never be 2. But I want to do it, so I'm going to do it. Stop the script. So as soon as it runs down here, it will never, if one of these matches, it will never get down here. And now I can duplicate this and say if it is 4, I want it to be a T. And if it is 5, I want it to be a Q. Finally, because we added these gatekeepers, I can actually make a case that says if it is not 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, something has gone wrong in our code. We do not have a letter for that. So I will, by default, if everything else goes wrong, I will set this to X. X means something bad happened in our case. And now I need to go back to my popcorn and I need to add these costumes here. Because we have the K, we have the dot, we have the space. So let's add the letters. Just like before, I need to rename the costume to exactly the same as the letter I wrote over here. So I'll add all of these and get back to you. I have added the letters here, and now if I go to my backdrop and I change the popcorn number to 10, I run, it says 10. If I change it to something quite a bit bigger, it will show 1.00 T. Let's see, 1, 2, 3 more is Q, and 1, 2, 3 more is X. So it works. On my pretty numbers, we are done with these two parts. We still have a little bit to do up here later, but we will get to that when we know why we want to change something. Let me just hide this pretty number multiplier, so we don't need to look at that anymore. And I can hide my popcorn as well. The next thing we're going to look at is we need these popcorn per second and popcorn per click to be beautiful as well. So what we decided to do is to move popcorn per second up here underneath my current popcorn amount. So we need to make this smaller to make room for my popcorn per second. So I need to change these numbers here. We spend a little bit of time in class to figure out what numbers we want. I want to change this and this. This is the initial popcorn here. Where it goes a little bit up and to the left. I want to change the size, I think. Here we set the size to 20. We could just reduce this a little bit, but the main problem is that the popcorn is way too large. So I'm going to go to my costume and I'm gonna select all of it, Control A, and I'm gonna reduce it in size. So let's make it a bit smaller even than this. I think I want something like this size. And then I'm gonna center it. Makes the numbers a little bit more manageable here, because now I can set the size to 40 here instead. So now if I run, it looks the way I want it to look. Up to you what you want to, how you want to modify the sizes here. I also want to move the number and change the size of that. So let's see, this one should be -180. This is the space between the numbers here. If the numbers get smaller, I also want to reduce the space between numbers. And I'm going to move this a little bit. So let's see how that looks. And maybe the popcorn got a little bit too small in this example. So let's up this to 45. Yes, I think that looks okay. No, this one should be 30, that's why. Here we go. And let's change this back to 40 again. That's what I want. And now I want this one up here. So let's have a look at that next. I'm gonna need to create a lot more clones in this sprite, because this needs to all be here as well, and here as well, for popcorn per second and popcorn per click. Let's move this one up here. We're gonna add popcorn per click eventually up here as well. So this popcorn here needs to be a clone. Right now in our code, it is simply the original. So I'm going to move this over here. What I could do, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create a clone. Create a clone of myself here. And I want to move this up here. Now I need somehow to know, am I trying to make the popcorn or am I trying to make the number down here? So I could set, let's set digit to 0. Let's move this a little bit apart so we can see what's going on. I've set digit to 0. And then over here I say, if digit is 0, if my digit is 0, then I want to do this. I want to set size to 40%, show and switch custom to popcorn. And obviously I do not want it to go down here and be a number. So I'm gonna say stop this script. I also need to bring this one over here. It needs to go to the correct position. But if we look at this, first I set it to 0, then I create a clone of myself, and then I set it to 1 and create many clones and increase it by 1 every time. But from 0 to 1 is also just an increase one time. So I could just set this to 0 down here and delete this. The first thing it will do now is digit is going to be 0 and it's going to create the initial popcorn. After that, digit is going to be more than 0 and it's going to add the numbers down here. So let's see if this works. Let's add all of these together and start. And it works. Now I have 2 popcorn here because I need to hide the original sprite I no longer want to see on my screen. So I'm going to say hide in my setup. And whenever I make a clone, I need to show it, but I already do that in here, so that's okay. And now I only have 1. I have my clone. Now we're ready to look at how do we make even more clones to show popcorn per second. So we want to make 2 initializations instead of just 1. So I'm going to go to my init. I'm going to change it to init popcorn per popcorn total. That is the original one. I'm going to make a new block that's called init popcorn per second. It has to run without screen refresh. I'm going to put that down here. And after I init my popcorn total, I'm going to init popcorn per second. And I'm simply going to take all of this code and duplicate it and move down here. Except my name now has to be popcorn per second. I'm going to take all of this, I'm going to duplicate it and put down here. It will create the same thing again on top of each other. Obviously now it will not work because it will do everything on top of each other. Well, let's see if I can actually grab there's two X's now. Let's have a look at, there's some other things we need to fix first. I have two scripts that run when I start as a clone. That is not a good idea. We need, if I'm inside init popcorn total, I want to go to this piece of code. But if I call create clone from init popcorn per second, I want to go to this piece of code. So how do we do that? I'm going to take this when I start as a clone and put somewhere else, and I do not want this one here to be when I start as a clone. When I start as a clone, I want to check which one of these did I come from. So do we have anything unique in these two blocks here that shows me where did I come from? Yes, we do. We have the name. The name is changing depending on did I come from popcorn total or did I come from popcorn per second. So up here I can say if name equals popcorn total equals, and let's grab the name down here, and here I'm going to write, I'm not going to write it because I'm going to make spelling mistakes. I'm going to write, for example, a capital T here. This is not the same. So I'm going to go down here, I'm going to duplicate it, Control C, up here Control V. If name is popcorn per total, then I want to do something, and I want it to be a gatekeeper and stop this script. Otherwise, I'm going to duplicate this, going to put here, and I want to copy this text from popcorn per second. I'm going to put it here, and now it will do this if block and stop this script. So now I'm going to say if this name is equal to this, I want to run this block of code here. How can I do that? Well, I'm just going to make a new block, and I'm going to call it show popcorn total. This one has to run with screen refresh because we are updating the numbers on every frame. Show popcorn total, and I will take that and put it as a header here, and I will, it's important that I grab show popcorn total. I will put that one here, and I want to do the same thing down here. So I'm going to add one that is called show popcorn per second. It has to refresh. I cannot put a check mark here. I'm going to add this header here, and up here I'm going to show popcorn per second. So now if I run the game, it still has two things on top of each other because I did not change the position of everything yet. So how can we test this works? Well, let's see. I'm going to change the initial to a 7. So now I should have a 7 and a popcorn on top of each other. But let's make this look better when I show popcorn per second. First, we're going to add some sprites that I prepared. They are in our chat. So I will upload the two sprites for that. It is just text. One says per click, one says per second. It's important that we centralize these because they're not centralized automatically. So I will just center them. Maybe I'll move them to the top as well. No, I won't apparently. Okay, so in my popcorn per second, I will show the new sprite we made that is called per second. And now all I have to do is move them so that they're in the correct position. And I will just put the numbers here that we found in class that we want to use. Is minus 190 and 135. The size should be 50. Down here I wanted to move a little bit. The distance should be a lot smaller because I'm going to make the numbers a lot smaller. And here I'm going to set the size to 10. And what does it show? I don't know why. Sometimes I have a problem with this set size. Now it helped to simply go to my costumes and switch the costume. I do not know why. But now it says per second here. It still says X. So why does it say 1.00x here? Well, in my code for init popcorn per second, I add the name to numbers owners over here. So you can see the second item in my list here is popcorn per second. That is correct. And then I add popcorn to number original. So it shows here how many popcorns do I have. But that is not what I want, the number I want to show here. I want it to show popcorn per second. So I need to change this variable to popcorn per second. And then I add a 0 over here. We're going to need a placeholder for later. Okay. Now we go down here and it says get item 1 from number pretty. That is here. And here as well. We want this one to get item 2 from number pretty. And now it will show a 0 here. But if I hire grandpa, you can see my numbers per second goes up here. This number does not change, and this number does not change. The first thing we need to do is make this number change, the original number. So I'm going to go to my calculator. Here where we replace item 1 in number original with popcorn. I also want to replace item 2 in my number original with popcorn per second. So now if I run the game and I hire a grandpa, this number changes to 2. But this number did not change. We're going to look at that next. In our pretty numbers sprite, we only ever look at the first item in these 3 lists, and we make that number beautiful. I want to go through all the items in the list and make all of them beautiful. So I'm going to read all the number original and put all the number pretty over here. So what we can do is we will look at length of number original. This will simply say how many items are there in this list, and right now there's 2. I want to do this 2 times. If there were 3 items in the list, I would want to run this code 3 times, 1 from number 1, 1 from number 2, and 1 for number 3. So I want to make a repeat until loop. And I want to say I want to do it until I have done it length number of times. So I'm going to need a variable to keep track of how many times have I done it right now. So I'm going to make a new variable and I'm simply going to call it index. That is just how many times have I done it, and it's going to be for this sprite only. Before I start, I'm going to set my index to 1. This is the first time I'm doing it. And then I'm going to check, is my index bigger than the length? So let's add that one in here and take my index from down here. I don't want to show the index, so let's remove that. It is 1. Imagine there were no items in the list. The list was empty. So the length of the list is 0. but I'm trying to get number 1. That does not exist. So this code in here wouldn't trigger. This would just continue down here with whatever I had down here. If item number 1 exists, my index is 1, then this code will run, and then I want to update my index by 1 to say now I want to look at number 2. So now after I run it the first time, I change my index by 1. Now index is 2. Is index bigger than the highest, this number here, the 2? I have two items in my list. No, it's not. Okay, so I'm going to run it again, do whatever I want to do in here. Then I'm going to change index by 1. So now index is 3. I'm going to say, is 3 bigger than 2? Yes, it is. Okay, so stop doing whatever you're doing. So now I'm going to take all the code inside my forever loop here. I'm going to put that above my change. It's important that the change is at the bottom here. And instead of getting the first item from number original and the first item from number pretty, I want to get the index number. So the first time through, I will look at number 1 and change number 1 over here. The second time through, because index has changed, I will look at number 2 and write number 2 over here. Then I change my index again to 3, and this loop will stop because there's not 3 items in the list. Now if I put that back in here, we have a little bit of a quirk in Scratch. Because we have a repeat loop, a loop will trigger once per frame. That means it will update each of these. 1 frame the first, 1 frame the next, and then it will go back to the forever loop and it will do it again and again. But imagine I had 30 numbers in this list. It's a long list. Then it will update 1 number in the first frame, 1 in the second, 1 in the third. And there's 30 frames in a second, so it will take a second before it would get back to the first one. If we had 300 numbers, it would take 10 seconds. So I need a way to have this entire loop run every frame. And the way we do that in Scratch is we make a new block. And I'm just going to call it fast start. And it has to run without screen refresh. This is the way we can force a loop to do all its iterations in 1 frame. And I'm going to put everything we had here, I'm just going to put in fast start, and I'm just going to call that from my forever loop. So now the code will, when I start, it will trigger this block. This block will run all of its loops. Then the code goes back to here. At the end of the block, it will wait until the next frame, and it will do it all again. So let's see if it works. Now if I buy some Grand Pass, this number up here updates. Let's see. So it works. There's one thing here on the popcorn. We call these digits. These are not actually digits. Digit is this, 2, 3, 5, 8, 7, they are all digits. Digits are numbers. We also have letters. K, M, B, T, Q are letters. Then the final concept we have is characters. So let me write something here. That is letters and numbers and all special characters. So it could be minus, plus, this and comma and dot and percentage and dollar and everything I can type on my keyboard basically. We call this variable digit, which doesn't really make sense anymore because we show spaces and dots and letters. So let's rename this. I right click it on it over on the variable list. If you cannot find it, maybe that's because you're not on the popcorn sprite. I'm going to rename it to char character. That was all for this week. I will see you next week.